I am delighted to have the First Sea Lord, Admiral Tony Radakin, on stage with me. And we're now going to the Assistant Secretary of the US Navy, James Gertz, live in the Pentagon, to hear from them both in conversation about a key topic, interchangeability in a bipolar world.
Shall I go first?
Yes, if you don't mind, Vicky,
shall I go first?
Yeah.
So it's a delight to be sharing a panel with Secretary Gertz. It speaks to much of this conference. We go back several years. He has an amazing background as an out-and-out innovator who has done it at scale, both in SOCOM, and he's now doing that with the US Navy. And we have tried to hook up with Secretary Gertz so that he can challenge our innovation program in the Royal Navy, and to also look for areas where we can come together and grow together with our various ideas. And part of this is a conversation that we have been having with Mike Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, about shifting from interoperability to interchangeability. And it's really a reflection that for many of us, all through our careers, we have had a drive for interoperability, about being able to work with foreign allies, and sometimes that's relatively basic. That's about being able to talk to each other, being able to understand each other, being able to work together, our systems being able to complement each other. But increasingly, it feels to us that that bar has to be raised, and to recognize that going forwards, there will be a lot more times where we are actually talking about interchangeability. And that's already happening. When Angus Essenhigh talks about the US Marine Corps and the jets on board this ship, that is an obvious example of interchangeability. If I look at what is going on in the North Atlantic with our submarines, with the US submarines, with other nations' submarines and their ships and their aircraft, again, it's about interchangeability. And so we're trying to drive a new standard, partly to drive all of us to strengthen our interoperability, but also to go even higher and to recognize interchangeability is going to be a stronger feature in the future. How are we going to do this? Well, Mike Gilday talked about our signing an agreement where we will focus on 4 areas: underwater, our carrier programs, our Marines, so working with the US Marine Corps and their drive for distributed warfare and linking that with what we want to do with our Royal Marines and the Future Commando Force, and then also embracing technology and some of the things that other panelists have been talking about, whether it's in terms of artificial intelligence, whether it's hypersonics, whether it's cyber, that we look to share the areas where we can come together. And I think this is incredibly important because it goes back to what Lord Sedwell said at the beginning. The notion of integrated forces, the notion of fusion, this is much stronger than just 2 navies. This is about our ability to integrate across the rest of defense, across the rest of government, but that integration to also go across to our allies. So that's what we are talking about in terms of the phrase that we've coined called interchangeability.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to welcome Assistant Secretary of the US Navy, James Gertz, now to speak on the topic of interchangeability in a bipolar world. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me here. I can assure you with some certainty I would much rather be out there on the HMS Queen Elizabeth than here in the Pentagon, but I am fortunate we could dial in here and connect, and I really look forward to the dialogue. So I'll just have a few opening comments and leave plenty of time for discussion. But as you stated, and I think through this whole conference, I think there is no more important time than to get after this, and no more important issue than how are we going to continue to secure our maritime domain to allow the global freedom of maneuver in terms of commerce. And what most folks don't understand is 99% of the internet flows underwater. So it's also to allow the flowing of ideas and connections under the sea as well. And it's been demonstrated, I think, with great certainty that our ability to scale and transform is directly enabled by our relationship together. You can think of many great examples from World War II, the Polaris program, and started in 1967, all the way through the Cold War, to a lot of the experiences many of us have had on the battlefields and counterterrorism for the last 2 decades, to looking at now. And just by the nature of being out there on that ship with Marines flying and UK pilots flying, you're seeing that being actualized. As we speak, we're doing the same thing with P-8 aircraft, and we are jointly producing the recapitalization of our ballistic missile submarine force. And so it's occurring all around us. We know it has to happen. I think our collective challenge is, how do we do this at scale? And I'm optimistic on this vision of interchangeability. Interoperability is a necessary precursor, but I don't think it's enough. And it will be an enduring competitive advantage of us, because that's not something you can reproduce by a totalitarian or non-democratic regime. And so I think it is going to be one of our enduring competitive advantages. But we have to do more than just be interchangeable in platforms. We've got to go beyond that. We've got to go beyond just agreements at high levels between government to government. And so I'm equally as optimistic in the work we've been doing together, Tony, on getting interchangeability of ecosystems and of ideas and of relationships all the way down to the deck plate level, so that we can attack this both top down and bottom up, and not just government to government, but with whole of ecosystems as we work here together. Because that is, I think, what is going to be the thing that enables us to do it at scale and speed. We can enable it through our top level vision and agreements, but we've got to create the mechanisms to allow that. And so one of the mechanisms we've used to great strength, I think, is our international agreements. You know, we have over 70 multilateral and bilaterals between our 2 countries. We've got over 20 information sharing agreements, close to 200 foreign military sales cases. So we've got good tools. We've used those tools very effectively. Again, necessary but not sufficient. One of the tools we have been using here, we started at SOCOM, we've expanded it in the Navy, is to create what we're calling tech bridges, ways to bridge different communities so that we can get interchangeability of ideas, not just interchangeability of platforms. And with that in mind, I'm proud to announce that we're going to establish our first ever overseas tech bridge there in London. It will be a place for two-way sharing of ideas. And it's not just government to government. It's with industry, it's with academia. Quite frankly, it's with everyday citizens who may have an idea. And the power of these tech bridges is they're not on bases, they're not behind barbed wire. They're not just only a requirements pull. It's a way that we can get idea push and accelerate that. And this London Tech Bridge will be truly unique. We have 12 of them in the US right now. They are allowing us to accelerate our ability to learn and connect with each other. But this one in London is truly almost you might want to call it a super tech bridge, because it's going to bridge in a whole new set of community. And I'm already, I had a lot of chatter from the junior officers this morning on both sides of the pond, excited about this way for us to empower and enable them. And so we will be standing that up in London. We will link in all the activity I know the UK has been doing in your innovation efforts, Tony. We'll connect them to all the innovation efforts we have here. And I think that's going to just accelerate this. And so, my final thought as an executor is about scale and speed, and that we have to have the right vision, which I think we have. And then we've got to back that up with the ability to acquire and field quickly the technology to our Marines and sailors on both sides of the pond and together in this new interchangeable force. And so I think this, amongst the other things we're doing, is going to allow us to create that machine, that pipeline that will continue to ensure that we remain at the top of our game and leverage our enduring competitive advantage, which is our relationship together. And so it's with great honor to be here with you, sadly remotely, but I look forward to continuing all the great initiatives you started there, Tony, and with the optimism I see ahead.
Thank you so much. And I wondered, First Sea Lord, you wanted to pick up yourself. I know that you were planning to have some questions direct for Assistant Secretary Geertz.
Well, I think the tech bridge and what that potentially enables speaks to some of the other aspects of the conference, because I think Peter Frankopan was right to describe the need for disruption, and that has to be an element of our agility. And I think we all know that we have a dilemma that as reasonably large institutions, that sometimes generating disruption and generating that agility is difficult for us. And the tech bridge is an example of where we go to other people in order to open the doors so that we can have access to a much larger community that might be far more challenging. And that to me is one of the dilemmas. And I am a fan of multilateralism. I am a fan of being able to fight with allies such as, alongside us with allies such as America and the magnificence of the NATO construct. But we have to somehow fathom a way that we don't end up in these sort of cumbersome monolithic structures, and we can still have access to some of the brightest ideas and somehow push them through our organizations. And that's the piece where I think it's a dilemma for all of us, and we're looking for whatever avenues we can see that might help us with that dilemma. And I think it's the same for a lot of the major powers and major countries. And that's where we're trying to link with America to see how they might be trying to overcome this dilemma.
Yeah, Tony, we have the same dilemma on our side. And that's why a strong relationship, but differing perspectives is so valuable. And I think the two words that come to mind that I think are good words for us are bold humility, right? We have to have the humility that we may not generate the best answer ourselves or internally, or top down, or the way bureaucracies tend to like to do things. There are great ideas in sailors' minds and Marines' minds and young kids' minds coming through college. I mean, there are great ideas everywhere. So we've got to have humility not to assess the idea necessarily by where it comes from, but then have the boldness, the architectures, the mindset to rapidly then leverage those ideas and speedline them into the field. So it's not good enough just to have ideas in the discovery phase, where we're really trying to work together. I think we can leverage each other. We did it in the special operations community between the U.S. and U.K. is then find the pipeline to speed those into the field and put them in sailors and Marines' hands to test those ideas and see if they're worth scaling further.
Thank you so much. So I have a few questions, if I may, both for you, Assistant Secretary Geertz, and First Sea Lord. I wanted to ask first about something you mentioned, Assistant Secretary. You talked about the need for scale and speed in terms of thinking about the future and the kinds of strategic policies you might enact. We're all very conscious that we're having this conversation against a background of incredibly rapid changes. And I wondered how you see that challenge of dealing with speed and scale when you could argue that 10 years ago, we didn't really have an idea of the nature of how big, say, China, Russia, and the pandemic would be as major features of our defense and strategic thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point, but I guess I'm a little bit of a look at disruption as opportunity, because disruption creates different conditions with which you can then, if you can leverage the opportunity, capitalize on. A challenge in any bureaucracy tends to be that it focuses on managing risk, not taking advantage of opportunities. But that's where we have had some success. Some great success working together as two different nations, because what might be a barrier for me may be an opportunity for the UK or vice versa, where the UK may have a barrier, let's say testing a piece of gear on the aircraft carrier, may be an opportunity for me to test earlier than I would have through our own devices. And so I actually look at it from an abundance perspective, that there's an abundance of technology out there. There's abundance of great ideas out there. There's certainly now an abundance of urgency to get after them, which will, I think, help us break through some of the natural, overvaluing kind of the status quo. And the way I like to think about this is, it's kind of a 3-step process for me: vision the future or possible futures, which I think this conference is doing a great job with; build scalable platforms, which I think Tech Bridges and some of the other approaches we have are good; and then boldly and relentlessly experiment. And I think if we keep that kind of mindset in play, we can more quickly scale and transform to the vision of the First Sea Lord and the Chief of Naval Operations.
Thank you so much. First Sea Lord, what are your thoughts on this issue about the challenge of the rapid changes when you're trying to do scale and speed?
So I think it is a very significant problem. So to build on Secretary Geertz's comments, we have a Chief of Defence Staff in the UK who is absolutely clear about the need for all of us as Chiefs of Staff to place more emphasis on experimentation, and that is, it's not become a lost art. It isn't as strong in our cultures as it ought to be. And when you look back to when we have been particularly successful, it was always a stronger part of our culture. I think we're starting to do some of those things. I think we're starting to reach out to other parts of industry in order to accept some of their challenges, and we are good at introducing prototypes. The piece that I think we're struggling with is then how you take those prototypes and you make them into a proper program. And that's where this feature of our bureaucracy, where we have these quite fixed structures, we have programs of record, they go on for quite a long time, we have a tendency to revere the status quo. I think this is a really significant issue when the backdrop is a world where there is a technological revolution that's ongoing. And so how we create mechanisms to be able to get into the speed issue and accept new ideas more quickly and adjust our processes and bureaucracy is fundamental. And then the other element of scale, which again we've touched on before, is how we generate the cash to invest in the good ideas. And I think that is not a sort of very lazy turning to mythical handouts from big government. That actually, I think, requires all of us to look at our own organizations and potentially take some very tough decisions where we opt away from the status quo in order to invest in the new exciting things. Now that's much, much easier said than done, but this to me is part of the thinking and sharing ideas and challenging each other in order to go after something that is going to be crucial if we're going to be successful in our warfighting requirements over the next decade.
Speaking of new exciting things, Assistant Secretary Geertz, you mentioned these tech bridges, the first ever international one opening in London. With my journalistic hat on, I thought, well, that's a news story. You mentioned that there are 12 already existent in the United States. And I wonder if you could offer some insight into their both advantages and disadvantages, because when you mention industry, academia, even ordinary citizens being part of this ideas push, on the one side, that sounds like a kind of opening up and a democratization. But the flip side of that is the risks of dissenting voices, people who have different political viewpoints about how US military should be deploying its resources, potentially being a cause of disruption, domestically. So could you give us a little insight into how well it's been working in the US and how you expect to confront those challenges with the new one in London?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say, one thing we're focusing on is velocity, right? Speed in the right direction. And a key for us is velocity of learning. to get gets to the first Seaload's point of experimentation and needing to learn faster, so that if we can learn faster, then we can not have these make or break large decisions because we're better informed when we make the decisions. The other element we found was we were not learning from each other and finding the great idea and connecting it to the right source. And so what we have found is the value of being able to connect a problem to folks working on the problem, or an idea to somebody who can do something with idea, has greatly outweighed any, I would say, turbulence of disruption. I'm asking for disruption. We're putting these mechanisms precisely in place to generate disruptive ideas, so that we give all of the decision makers a full idea of the decision space, and one that isn't necessarily overvaluing status quo, which bureaucracies tend to do. And so I have not found that to be problematic. And I think setting up this tech bridge in London just further enhances that speed of learning, that velocity of insight, which is what it's going to take if we're going to compete and win at the global scale.
First Sealord, what do you make of the tech bridges and the idea of the first one in London?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a very good thing for the UK. I think it speaks to the humility that Secretary Geertz said about having the confidence to reach out to other nations, that the ideas are not all in this single repository that might be your own institution. And therefore, and I also think the other piece, like any bridge, is that they tend to be two-way. So the fact that we can draw on it in both directions is really significant. And just to talk about some things rather than purely concepts, I think we have a bunch of things that speak to what's going on. The significance of the United States of America investing an air wing onto another nation's aircraft carrier is a remarkable achievement, and it speaks to a remarkable relationship in terms of trust and confidence and the ability to work together.
This is the F-35.
This is the F-35 Bravos. If I then come down a level or two, we have a program whereby we are investing in an extra large underwater drone. That's one of the largest underwater drones in the world. It's being built in Plymouth, and we're working together so that we both benefit from that kind of technology. We have another UK program which is called Maple, which is the mechanism whereby you can control your drones and you can speak to your drones and they can speak to each other, which again is a fundamental of effective warfighting, and where we think that that technology and some of the success that we've had might be of interest to the US. These are the things that we're sharing, so it's more than just the idea. These are actual projects which then enable us to move much more quickly, and it might mean that it's a crowdfunding approach or that it spawns another idea in one of the other nations, and then we move on. That's what we're trying to do.
Secretary Geertz, please, absolutely, step in.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, advantage of our tech bridge in London is we're teamed up with an accelerator program that the Royal Navy has established as part of the larger defense initiative over there. And so, you know, rather than me try and reinvent connections to all of those places, again, the best form of R&D for me is rip off and deploy, right? The fastest way to get something is take what's already there. And so we can immediately now tap into that. And I almost wanted to bring the quotes from the young officers who are on both sides of the pond here, excited about, holy moly, you're empowering us to take ideas and test their relevance and make a difference to each of our countries, each of our navies, each of our nations. And that empowerment is the kind of thing that really spurs the pipeline. The one thing we need to continue working on both sides is what's that pipeline from discovery to deployment, and getting from I've discovered a prototype to it's in the field for a Marine and a sailor to use. And that is an area, I think, again, of joint interest because of our close partnership. If a Royal Navy sailor has used it, that gives me confidence from the outside. I don't need to go prove to myself that it might be of value, and I think vice versa. So it's not only the technology piece, it's the employment and thinking about how to use it. And to, you know, many hands make fast work. That's part of why these kind of bilateral, multilateral approaches also allow us to scale, because we can each experiment and trust each other in the result that allows us to get a network speed, not individual speed.
Assistant Secretary of the US Navy James Gertz and the First Sea Lord, thank you both for bringing that discussion to an end by focusing it back on the human side, on servicemen and women. It was a fascinating discussion and a display of transatlantic cooperation. So thank you so much to you both.